Ever wonder how far someone will go to show off? I'm Timothy, and today we're covering wealthy Karens whose status symbols ultimately destroyed them. From a Karen whose $200,000 bracelet became her final flex, to a Karen who ignored a literal typhoon evacuation just to save her designer luggage. It was March 12, 2017, in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's around 7:42 p.m., and a high-end fundraiser is winding down inside a historic mansion, tucked behind stone gates and manicured grounds. The ceilings stretch nearly 20 feet overhead. The marble floors shine under antique chandeliers, and every step sends the sound of expensive heels echoing through the cavernous halls. One of the guests was Jacqueline McDuff. At 43, Jacqueline was a successful divorce attorney. Jacqueline built her reputation by winning ugly courtroom battles and making sure everyone knew it. Friends described her as confident. Former colleagues usually chose less flattering words, and the more I learned about her, the more it seemed like being noticed mattered just as much to her as actually winning. Status wasn't something Jacqueline enjoyed quietly. It was something she displayed. Her social media was packed with luxury resorts, VIP events, designer shopping trips, and photos carefully arranged to remind followers how successful she was. But nothing mattered more than the 3 custom-made diamond and gold cuff bracelets she wore almost everywhere. Together, they were worth nearly $200,000. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with expensive jewelry. But when one accessory costs more than most people's houses, it stops being jewelry and starts becoming a statement. The bracelets weren't subtle. They covered most of her left forearm, weighed several pounds, and caught attention from across a room, and Jacqueline loved that. Throughout the evening, she repeatedly redirected conversations back to them. Several guests later recalled her asking people to guess their value before proudly correcting them. At one point, she reportedly joked that one bracelet cost more than some guests earned in a year. Not everyone laughed. As the party wound down, Jacqueline decided the night needed one more social media post. She headed toward the mansion's grand marble staircase and instructed her assistant to stand at the bottom with his phone. She didn't want a video of the staircase or the mansion. She wanted a close-up of the bracelets. Just before filming began, another guest warned her that the polished marble steps were slippery and her stiletto heels looked unstable. Jacqueline barely acknowledged the comment. Instead, she reminded her assistant to keep the camera focused on her left arm. Then she started down the staircase. Halfway down, everything went wrong. The heavy stack of bracelets shifted repeatedly against her wrist and forearm. Witnesses later said she kept subtly adjusting her arm to keep the jewelry positioned toward the camera. When she reached a lower section of the staircase, the weight of the bracelets suddenly slid downward again. The movement pulled at her sleeve and threw her balance off just enough for her left heel to land awkwardly on the edge of a marble step. Her foot slipped instantly. She lost her footing and pitched forward. Witnesses watched as she instinctively threw her left arm toward the brass handrail, but the sudden fall happened too fast. The extra weight on her forearms swung outward as she fell, twisting her body sideways instead of toward the railing. Her hand brushed the rail but never secured a grip. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, but Jacqueline was completely unresponsive. Security footage later showed the bracelets shifting moments before the slip and swinging heavily during the fall, contributing to the loss of balance that sent her sideways down the staircase. She never woke up. The coroner's report was grim: multiple skull fractures, severe brain trauma, broken neck vertebrae, and massive internal bleeding. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma, and investigators concluded that the unusually heavy bracelets likely contributed to the initial loss of balance and the awkward body position during the fall. Following the investigation, the mansion's owners reviewed the staircase area and implemented additional safety measures. As for Jacqueline's estate, it was settled the following year. Those exact diamond cuffs, recovered completely intact, ended up in an estate auction catalog, listed with tragic irony as the centerpiece of her collection. Jacqueline never made it to the bottom of those stairs, but as tragic as that was, the next case is even harder to process because, unlike Jacqueline, it had warning signs, plenty of them actually. It was August 14, 2018, in District 1, Ho Chi Minh City. If you've ever been, you know the vibe. The air is thick, humid from overnight rain, and the streets around Ben Thanh Market are already total chaos. Vendors, tourists, and delivery scooters are all weaving past each other on the damp asphalt. Meredith Mersel was one of the tourists. She was 46, living in Singapore with her private equity consultant husband and running a travel blog for wealthy expats. Meredith was sharp, great on camera, and knew her stuff when it came to high-end hotels. But she had this one really bad habit. She's overconfident. She constantly dismissed safety warnings from locals, calling it overcaution. She'd even film herself ignoring them, pitching it to her followers as being an authentic traveler. That morning, her hotel concierge connected her with a local guide who knew the area well. Before they even left the lobby, the guide noticed the massive diamond engagement ring on her hand and warned her that scooter thieves often targeted expensive jewelry. Meredith brushed off the warning, held up the ring for everyone to see, and insisted she wasn't going to hide it. With the ring still on her finger, she headed out and continued filming her trip. As they got close to the market, the traffic along the curb was heavy and fast. The guide warned her a second time. Instead of listening, Meredith actually stepped off the sidewalk into the road, putting her back to the traffic just to get a better camera angle. At 10:41 a.m., it happened. Two guys on a Honda scooter rode up from behind. The passenger reached out and grabbed her left hand, but because her ring had a thick band, it didn't just slip off, it got stuck on her knuckle. The sudden tug yanked Meredith off balance and pulled her into the roadway. The ring eventually came free, but by then she was already stumbling forward. She fell hard onto the pavement directly in the path of traffic. A second scooter traveling behind her had almost no time to react. The rider slammed on the brakes and tried to swerve, but couldn't avoid her. The scooter struck Meredith before sliding across the road. The thieves blended into traffic and vanished within seconds. The guide screamed for help, and a local vendor called for an ambulance. It took 20 minutes to get through the traffic, but by the time they arrived in the hospital, it was too late. She was pronounced dead an hour later. The autopsy later revealed that Meredith suffered catastrophic neck and spinal injuries when the second scooter struck her after the fall. The impact fractured her upper cervical vertebrae and caused fatal damage to her spinal cord. Her injured finger was one of the most visible wounds at the scene, but it wasn't what killed her. The fatal injuries came from being knocked into traffic and hit by the oncoming scooter. Investigators reviewed nearby security cameras and witness recordings, which provided clear images of the scooter and the suspects involved. Despite an extensive search, no arrests were made during the following months, and the diamond ring was never recovered. That's the part that makes the story especially grim. The one item Meredith refused to take off disappeared completely, while the decision to keep wearing it ultimately cost her far more than the ring itself. Meredith at least had streets and strangers around her when it happened. The next case had a camera, a locked chamber, and nobody in the room who was allowed to tell her no. It was October 9th, 2015, a Friday morning in Soho, Manhattan. The weather was cold and overcast, with temperatures hovering in the low 50s. Inside a loft building, things were quiet. Most people had already left for work, leaving the hallways nearly empty by mid-morning. This is where Anastasia Pallard lived and worked. Anastasia was 36, and she marketed herself as a high-end wellness expert. She targeted wealthy women in finance, fashion, and media who were willing to pay top dollar for exclusive treatments. Now, here's the thing. She had absolutely zero medical background. She had a business degree, but she was incredibly good at using clinical-sounding buzzwords to make ordinary wellness trends sound like cutting-edge science. Her clients totally bought into it because she sounded like an authority, and her loft looked exactly like a high-tech clinic. To keep her brand looking elite, Anastasia leased a commercial walk-in cryotherapy chamber and set it up right inside her apartment. It became the backdrop for her social media. She live-streamed her sessions constantly. Her follower count was shooting up, and she'd just landed a big supplement sponsorship. That chamber was her entire business. But she made a massive, fatal mistake. The technician who installed the chamber told her flat out to never use the machine without a second person in the room to monitor it, which, to me, is just basic safety that you never ignore. But during one of her live streams, the tech accidentally walked into the frame. Anastasia felt having a worker in the background ruined her solo expert image, so she fired him. She decided she'd just run the machine herself, and she'd already done it twice alone without any issues. That Friday morning, she started up a live stream and stepped inside the chamber. What she didn't know was that the nitrogen supply line had a faulty valve connector. As the session continued, nitrogen began leaking into the loft itself rather than venting safely outside. Because nitrogen displaces oxygen without any smell or warning, the air around the chamber gradually became oxygen deficient. And here is the truly terrifying part about nitrogen. You don't feel like you're suffocating. You don't gasp for air. Instead, your brain just quietly starves, which is the most chilling detail of all, because you would have absolutely no idea it was even happening. Witnesses later said Anastasia suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence and became unusually quiet. Within seconds, her knees appeared to give out, and she slid down against the inside wall of the chamber until she was no longer visible through the viewing panel. At first, most viewers assumed the live stream had frozen or that she had simply stepped out of frame. Hours passed without any new posts, replies, or activity. Several regular clients later said this was unusual because Anastasia normally responded to messages almost immediately. By early afternoon, friends and clients were attempting to contact her directly. When repeated calls and messages went unanswered, concern began spreading among people who followed her closely online. Eventually, one local client who knew where Anastasia lived contacted building management and asked them to perform a welfare check. Building staff attempted to reach Anastasia through the intercom and by phone several times over the next hour. When nobody answered and there was still no sign of activity inside the loft, they contacted emergency services. When firefighters and building security finally entered the apartment, several hours had passed since the live stream had ended. The cryotherapy chamber was still powered on. Investigators later found that the room's oxygen monitoring alarm had been disabled, likely because repeated warnings had become a nuisance during previous sessions. The medical examiner ruled that Anastasia died from hypoxia. Her body had some surface frostbite on her legs and back from collapsing against the freezing walls, but she was already gone before they found her. Her brain had just run out of air. A few weeks later, the state issued a massive safety warning about unsupervised cryotherapy. Anastasia's business page stayed online for a while, with her very last post tragically promoting the exact machine that took her life. It's hard to watch someone disappear on a live stream, and somehow it's just as hard to read about someone who drowned in a parking garage holding onto a box, both of them in the end, alone with something they refused to leave behind. It was September 11th, 2017. Tropical storm Irma had already torn through the Florida Keys and was pushing a slow, heavy surge toward Miami Beach. By early evening, the sky above Collins Avenue was a nasty gray-green. Rain was coming down sideways, and the streets were starting to flood. Vanessa Parson, 48, had spent 20 years building a highly successful business sourcing limited edition luxury luggage and rare designer goods for wealthy clients. She was sharp, had incredible instincts, and genuinely believed that how you traveled said everything about who you were. Her absolute prized possession was an $80,000 limited edition designer trunk. I'm not going to name the brand here for legal reasons, but trust me, it's one of those luxury labels where the luggage can cost more than a new car. The trunk was a massive brass-fitted box, and she had brought it to Miami for a client meeting. She checked into a boutique waterfront hotel that afternoon and parked her SUV in the underground garage, specifically to keep that expensive trunk out of the rain. Now, here is where things take a turn. The hotel staff warned everyone. The underground garage was a major flood risk if the storm surge got worse. Warnings were posted right by the elevators and stairs. By 7 p.m., the manager ordered the garage evacuated. Security footage showed a dozen guests running down, grabbing their stuff, and leaving within minutes, but not Vanessa. She didn't head down until about 14 minutes after the warning. By the time she got under, the power had failed. Infrared security footage caught 2 hotel employees gesturing wildly for her to turn around and get out. They didn't physically stop her, though. The water was already up to her knees when Vanessa opened the back of her SUV and started dragging the trunk toward the exit ramp. Now, keep in mind, this trunk weighed nearly 90 pounds empty, and it definitely didn't have wheels made for swimming. She had to keep stopping just to fix her grip as the water kept rising. This is really a frustrating case for me. No piece of luggage, no matter how rare, is worth your life. Then another powerful surge of floodwater rushed into the garage from the street-level drainage system. The current slammed into parked vehicles, sending floating debris and loose objects tumbling through the water. Vanessa finally abandoned the trunk and tried to move toward the stairwell, but by then, the conditions had changed completely. The water rose from waist level to chest level within moments. Witnesses said she struggled to keep her footing as the current pushed her sideways across the slick concrete floor. At one point, she collided with the side of a parked vehicle and disappeared briefly behind a row of SUVs. Investigators later determined that Vanessa was likely swept into a deeper section of the garage where floodwater was circulating around the support columns and parked vehicles. In the darkness, with debris moving around her and visibility reduced to almost nothing, she became disoriented and unable to reach higher ground before the lower level filled further. Hotel staff called 911 when they realized someone was missing in the flooded garage. Fire crews arrived within minutes, but rising water and poor visibility delayed entry. Vanessa was found near her SUV and could not be revived. The medical examiner ruled the death an accidental drowning. Investigators concluded she repeatedly tried to retrieve the luxury trunk instead of evacuating, while bruising on her hands and forearms indicated she had struggled against the floodwater. It's just a heartbreaking, senseless tragedy. The hotel has since installed automatic flood barriers to make sure this never happens again. For me, this case is a harsh, unforgettable reminder that when nature forces an evacuation, you have to leave your stuff behind. Objects can be replaced. You can't. Vanessa held onto a trunk until the water took her, and what gets you about all of these is the same thing every time, not the accidents themselves, but the exact moment where turning back was still possible, and they didn't. It's January 27th, 2018, in St. Moritz, Switzerland. It's cold, right below freezing, and the Snow Polo World Cup is in full swing. The grounds are packed with wealthy people in furs and heavy wool coats, drifting between heated tents and the field. The horses have been running since noon, so the ground is hard, frozen, and loud underfoot. Rebecca Vant, 58, was well known in elite auction houses from Geneva to New York. She spent most of her adult life using her husband's family fortune to buy things most people were afraid to touch. She wasn't loud or aggressive, but she was incredibly calculating. At places like Christie's, she had a reputation for showing up without a catalog and leaving with exactly what she wanted. She knew how to work a room and loved the attention. That afternoon, she was wearing a full-length coat that wildlife forensics later proved was made from genuine snow leopard pelt, likely from 2 different animals. Before the match, she actually told at least 3 guests it was just high-end fake fur. She'd worn it to events like this before without any issues, probably because St. Moritz attracts the kind of crowd that either doesn't ask questions or already knows the truth. But this time, a wildlife trade journalist on assignment spotted her. He'd been watching her for about 20 minutes before moving in to get a clear video. Rebecca noticed the camera. She looked at him, looked away, then looked back. You could see her posture change. Clearly panicking, she spoke to a staff member and then walked quickly toward the side of the field, trying to get away from the media. Staff near the rope barriers literally shouted at her twice to stop. She ignored them, ducked under the rope, and walked straight into the horse paddock, an area completely closed to guests. Inside, 2 grooms were cooling down a mare that had just been playing for over 30 minutes. Based on reports I gathered, the horse was still hyped up and hadn't settled down yet. 1 groom stood near the mare's head holding the reins, while the second groom walked alongside her right shoulder. Instead of stopping, Rebecca slipped behind both men and continued toward the horse's rear quarter while still glancing back toward the journalist. Because her attention was focused behind her, she drifted directly into the area just behind the mare's left hip. From that position, the horse could no longer see her clearly. Horses have strong forward and side vision, but the space directly behind them is one of their biggest blind spots. 1 groom stepped up and raised his hand to stop her. At that moment, Rebecca was standing slightly behind the mare's left side, only a few feet from its hindquarters. The horse shifted its weight. Right then, still looking backward, Rebecca spun around to face the direction she came from. As she turned, she swung that heavy, full-length coat out in a wide arc. The fur whipped through the cold air less than a meter from the horse's flank. If you know anything about horses, you know what happens next. The mare spooked and kicked out with both hind legs in a single explosive motion. Both hooves hit Rebecca squarely in the chest. The impact literally lifted her off the ground and threw her roughly 6 feet backward. She landed flat on her back in the frozen dirt and didn't move. The groom rushed to her in 10 seconds, screaming for help. Event medics were there in 4 minutes, and an ambulance arrived in 6. But when they got to her, she had no pulse. The journalist's camera actually caught the entire thing from about 130 feet away. The autopsy report was brutal. Both hooves hit her sternum directly, shattering it and breaking 4 ribs. The force drove her broken breastbone inward, tearing the right ventricle of her heart. The coroner said the heart injury killed her in less than 2 minutes. There was absolutely no saving her. Swiss authorities seized the coat right there at the scene, and testing confirmed it was indeed illegal snow leopard fur. A deeper look into her private records uncovered a whole pattern of her buying black market wildlife items, making the whole thing just a deeply tragic case. Rebecca walked into a paddock to escape a camera, and what followed was over in seconds, which by now you already know is all it ever takes. It was June 22, 2016, out in Key Largo. By mid-morning, it was already brutal. Thick, sticky air and nearly 90 degrees before noon. The marina was packed and commercial boats had been churning up the channel since daybreak, sending these low, rolling wakes crashing into the docks every few minutes. The concrete near the slips was wet, dark, and incredibly slick. That morning, Cassandra Irons was there. At 54, Cassandra had built a small hotel empire in the Florida Keys, owning 4 boutique waterfront properties that started as a single struggling motel decades earlier. Nobody could deny she was successful. The problem was that Cassandra never let anyone forget it. She wasn't the kind of owner who stayed in an office. She was constantly walking properties, correcting employees, questioning managers, and inserting herself into jobs other people were already handling. Staff often joked that Cassandra could turn a 5-minute task into a 30-minute lecture. She also loved filming social media videos where she explained boating, hospitality, or business as if she were teaching a masterclass to everyone around her. The marina workers at Blackwater Cay knew her well, though not always in a good way. Several later described her as the type of person who treated every conversation like a competition. If someone knew something she didn't, she had to challenge it. If someone gave advice, she had to prove she knew better. And honestly, we've all met someone like that before. The person who can't simply be in the room. They have to be the smartest person in it. That morning, she brought 3 guests and her personal assistant to the docks to watch her brand new 52-foot motor yacht arrive from Fort Lauderdale. It was being delivered by a hired captain she'd never worked with before. Before the boat even made it to the slip, the dockmaster walked over and told the group to step back. He warned them that the wakes from the commercial traffic were heavy and the concrete was slick. Cassandra just waved him off. She told her assistant to keep filming, stepped closer to the edge, and started shouting docking directions at the captain. As the captain put the engines in reverse to slow down, a huge wake from a passing barge rolled into the marina. It slammed the boat's hull and pushed the back end 2 feet wider than the captain expected. On the dock, Cassandra took a step back, her right heel hitting a wet patch of concrete that sent her feet flying out from under her. But instead of trying to scramble away, Cassandra grabbed a concrete piling with both hands and turned back toward the yacht. Whether she was trying to steady herself or keep directing the docking process, the reaction placed her directly in the path of danger. It was a terrible mistake. The yacht's swim platform caught her across the left side of her chest, crushing her against the concrete piling. The boat surged a second time as another wave hit it. People standing just 15 feet away said they heard a sound like wood splitting. The boat pinned her for several seconds before bouncing away. Cassandra immediately collapsed at the base of the piling and did not get back up. Her assistant froze in shock for a moment before dropping the phone and rushing toward her. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived several minutes later, but Cassandra was already unresponsive. She was rushed to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead just after noon. The autopsy report was devastating. 8 broken ribs, a cracked breastbone, a torn liver, a ruptured spleen, and massive internal bleeding. She didn't hit her head or drown. The sheer pressure from the boat had crushed her. Following the tragedy, the marina painted bright red warning lines along the slips and made a strict rule. If you aren't crew, you stay behind the line until the boat is tied up. It's a smart safety move. Cassandra died on a dock she owned, giving orders nobody was allowed to question. And if that sounds familiar, it's because the next story starts almost the same way. It was February 18th, 2017. Aspen, Colorado, was under a weather advisory all morning. Up on the ridges, the wind was whipping at 35 miles per hour, switching directions without warning. It was freezing, so while the town was busy, the slopes were pretty empty. Most people had the good sense to stay inside, but not Brianna Penner. Brianna was 39 and well known in Aspen's luxury rental scene. For 10 years, she'd been buying ski chalets, flipping them, and renting them out for ridiculous prices to people who used money as a personality trait. Brianna ran her business with a massive ego and zero tolerance for pushback. Her contractors called her a nightmare to work for, but her managers stayed because the money was too good to walk away from. She wasn't necessarily a bad guy, but she definitely saw people as tools rather than human beings. That weekend, Brianna was hosting a private gathering at her Starwood property for 8 wealthy clients. To impress them, she arranged a 4-minute helicopter transfer from the airport directly to the chalet. She had done the same thing twice before under ideal conditions, and it had become one of her favorite ways to show off the property. This time was different. After reviewing the wind conditions, the pilot, who had more than a decade of mountain flying experience, determined that the elevated deck landing area wasn't safe. She recommended using a flat field below the house instead and completing the final stretch by vehicle, which sounds like the only sensible call to make. But Brianna wasn't interested in changing the plan. She pushed for the helicopter to come directly to the chalet, stubbornly insisting that the deck landing was the entire point of the arrival. Then her property manager pointed out another issue. 2 weeks earlier, Brianna had installed a satellite mast without a permit, right in the helicopter's flight path. But Brianna didn't care. She boarded the chopper at 4:42 p.m. and told the pilot to fly in low and slow so the guests on the deck could get a good video for their phones. They reached the property 4 minutes later to find the guests lined up by the deck railing with their phones out. The wind was brutal, and the pilot had to try twice just to stabilize the chopper. Despite the conditions, Brianna unbuckled her seatbelt, leaned forward, and started yelling at the pilot to get lower and hold it steady. Right then, a massive gust of wind shoved the helicopter 10 feet to the right. The rotor wash kicked up a blinding sheet of snow, forcing the guests to duck and cover, creating a total whiteout where, terrifyingly, nobody saw the danger coming. At 4:47 p.m., the main rotor slammed into that unpermitted satellite mast. The steel pole snapped instantly and got sucked right into the blades. The whole helicopter started vibrating violently, and the pilot lost control. The chopper spun hard, dropped its nose, and rolled onto its side, crashing onto a stone terrace 20 feet below the deck. Guests immediately started screaming and running for the terrace as the helicopter slammed into the stonework below. Several people called emergency services while others rushed toward the wreckage through the blowing snow. Emergency crews arrived about 20 minutes later and found the pilot alive, crawling out with a broken collarbone. But Brianna wasn't so lucky. Because she had unbuckled her harness to yell at the pilot, she took the full force of the crash when the cabin crumpled. The coroner's report showed she died within seconds from a fractured skull and a ruptured aorta. The FAA investigated. The property was fined for the illegal mast, and Brianna's company quickly removed the helicopter package from their website. To me, it's just a textbook example of how quickly cutting corners and letting your ego call the shots can cost you everything.